This is an introduction to the retreat and to the week and to the talks that I'll be giving. And this is the first retreat I've ever led, so I'm really glad you all came for it. So I picked this topic because I actually didn't know that much about Shakyamuni Buddha, and I thought it would be a really nice thing to spend a year reading the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha and learning more about him. And so that's what I did. I didn't know much before, and I actually have spent the year as much as possible, although it kind of accelerated in the last few months, reading his teachings, listening to Dharma talks on his teachings, and then I had 2 weeks at our hermitage in Scott Valley to really work on them, to really work on these talks. So I'd like to start with reading something that the Buddha said. It's called The Ancient City. Suppose, monks, a man wandering through a forest would see an ancient path, an ancient road traveled upon by people in the past. This is made for taller people, I think. He would follow it and would see an ancient city, an ancient capital that has been inhabited by people in the past, with parks, groves, ponds, and ramparts, a delightful place. Then the man would inform the king or a royal minister, "Sire, know that while wandering through the forest, I saw an ancient path, an ancient road, traveled upon by people in the past. I followed it and saw an ancient city, an ancient capital that had been inhabited by people in the past, with parks, groves, ponds, and ramparts, a delightful place. Renovate that city, sire." Then the king or royal minister would renovate the city, and some time later that city would become successful and prosperous, well populated, filled with people, attained to growth and expansion. So too, monks, I saw the ancient path, the ancient road traveled by the perfectly enlightened ones of the past. And what is that ancient path, that ancient road? It is just this noble eightfold path. That is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. I followed that path, and by doing so, I have directly known aging and death, its origin, its cessation, and the way leading to its cessation. I have directly known birth, existence, clinging, craving, feeling, contact, the six sense basis, name and form, consciousness, volitional formations, their origin, their cessation, and the way leading to their cessation. Having directly known them, I have explained them to the monks, the nuns, the male lay followers, and the female lay followers. This spiritual life, monks, has become successful and prosperous, extended, popular, widespread, well proclaimed among devas and humans. And whenever I hear this, especially the first time I read it, it really called to me, the ancient path. It's more than just the Noble Eightfold Path. It's what we find when we follow the Buddha's teachings. So it's the path and its fruition. And it calls to us because we all have Buddha nature. And it's calling to us. It calls to us something that is within each of us, something that has perhaps been hidden or covered over by like the ancient city. I remember when the first time I went on an alms round, I think it was the second alms round that we did here, And I remember the feeling of joy and anticipation in going on that alms round, because something in me was connecting to something ancient. And it wasn't necessarily just the old tradition of the Buddha and of those who followed him to go on alms round, but I think it was calling on something deeper. This longing to know our true nature, to go home to our true home. When I was a young monk here, we were studying a book called The Called and the Chosen. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a book about nuns in a Christian monastery. And in Christianity, there's a saying, all are called but few are chosen. So these nuns were the chosen ones. And Reverend Master used to say that in Buddhism, it's all are called but few answer. And we have all answered that call, or we wouldn't be here. So something has resonated within each of us when we've heard the Buddha's teaching. In chapter 19 of Reverend Master Hubert's translation of the Shobogenzo, on the ancient mirror, Dogen says, "What all Buddhas and ancestors accept, preserve, and individually pass on is the ancient mirror. It is their same view, their same face. It is their same image and their same casting, for they have done the same training and have realized the same truth." So tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about the life of the Buddha and what he was like. And I'm not going to be going through the whole of his life and telling you every detail. I'm just going to be mainly going to be talking about the things that jumped out at me when I was doing my reading. So it may not be the things you expect to hear about, although I added a few things just to round it out. But for some reason, these things seem to just say something to me, so I will say them to you. And one thing that really struck me was that Shakyamuni Buddha always remained a simple monk. And he always had to do his own training, and he was available for anyone who was interested in hearing it. But he didn't stop training after his enlightenment. In fact, if you read his life story, Mara is always tempting him. And Mara is our own self. So he had to keep up his training just like we have to. In the first chapter of the Diamond Sutra, it describes the simple act of his going on alms round and eating his meal. And this is the first chapter. "Thus have I heard. At one time, the Buddha was in the state of Shravasti at the Jeta Grove with a gathering of monks numbering 1,250. And when monks are said, I think sometimes it means monks and nuns, and I'm not sure. So I think there were nuns at this too. They were all monks. At mealtime, the world-honored one put on his robe, picked up his bowl, and went into the city of Shravasti to beg for food. After he had gone from house to house, he returned to the grove. When he had finished eating, he put away his robe and bowl, washed his feet, straightened his mat, and sat down." So I'm quoting here from Describing the Indescribable. That's Master Xing Yun's, I think it's his translation into Chinese. I'm not absolutely certain of that, of the Diamond Sutra. And I'm reading now from his commentary. The first section of the Diamond Sutra details the most ordinary of activities. The Buddha takes up his bowl, begs for food, returns to Jeta Grove, washes his feet, and sits. It is essential that one understand the unity of the ordinary and the ultimate, the commonplace and the transcendental, if one wants to understand the Diamond Sutra. The unity is a principle of the Diamond Sutra. Like a great artist, the Buddha not only says what he means, he also shows us what he means. Ultimate wisdom and ordinary reality are inextricably entwined. They cannot be separated. Even the Buddha had to get his own food, straighten his own mat. Ultimate wisdom is life itself seen in the clearest of lights. It is not some other world. The bliss of nirvana resides in each and everything in the universe. Nothing is excepted. And Reverend Master Jiyu used to say that all she ever wanted to be was a simple monk. And she would say, "It is enough for me to know the eternal. More I neither ask nor seek." So I'm sure you all know that the Buddha's teaching and the ancient path are for monks and lay trainees. And the Buddha taught many lay trainees and had many lay disciples. I'm sorry I'm doing a lot of quoting, but some people seem to say things better than I can come up with. So in the Buddha's Words, which is an anthology of the Buddha's teachings, Bhikkhu Bodhi, who edited and wrote introductions for this book, says in the preface, "If this anthology is meant to make any other point, it is to convey the sheer breadth and range of the Buddha's wisdom. While early Buddhism is sometimes depicted as a discipline of world renunciation, intended primarily for ascetics and contemplatives, the ancient discourses of the Pali Canon clearly show us how the Buddha's wisdom and compassion reached into the very depths of mundane life, providing ordinary people with guidelines for proper conduct and right understanding. Far from being a creed for a monastic elite, ancient Buddhism involved the close collaboration of householders and monastics in the twin tasks of maintaining the Buddha's teachings and assisting one another in their efforts to walk the path to the extinction of suffering. To fulfill these tasks meaningfully, the Dhamma had to provide them with deep and inexhaustible guidance, inspiration, joy, and consolation. It could never have done this if it had not directly addressed their earnest efforts to combine social and family obligations with an aspiration to realize the highest. And the Buddha spent his days instructing the monks and giving discourses to lay people, sometimes his devout disciples, sometimes he had meetings with people who were a little bit rude to him, and often he converted these people because of the way he spoke with them. And he also needed times of secluded meditation, where he'd go off by himself and just meditate and go deeply into his meditation, because he was training and he was a human being. And you can't just give all the time without refreshing and renewing yourself. So the Buddha had to do this as well. And this is why we have these retreats, so that you can renew and refresh yourself, just like the Buddha. Now, during the rainy season, the monks had to stay put because it was too difficult to travel. And they called this the Rains Retreat, so they would stay just in one place during the rainy season. And so during these times, the Buddha mainly stayed at Savatthi. Now here we go into different ways of saying things. Savatthi or Savatthi is the same as Shravasti. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about the different ways of saying these things. So he stayed in Savatthi in the state of Kosala, and Rajagaha, which was Rajagriha, in the state of Kosambi. In Savatthi, he would usually stay at Jetta's Grove, a park offered to him by a wealthy merchant and devout lay follower, Anatha Pindika, and I don't think I'm pronouncing that right. Occasionally he would reside at the eastern park offered by a devout laywoman, Visakha. In Rajagaha he often stayed at the bamboo grove, offered to him by the king of Kosambi, Seniya Bimbisara, or when he needed greater seclusion at Vulture Peak outside the city. So you've probably, if you've done any reading on the Buddha's teachings, you've probably heard of all these places. But during the rest of the year, he wandered through the Ganges Valley, always accompanied by a large retinue of bhikkhus. So he wasn't alone very often. But occasionally he would go off alone if there was someone he needed to talk to privately. So he would go off and speak with that person. During these talks, I'm going to be quoting a lot from the Pali Canon, and I wanted to tell you just a little bit about the Pali Canon in case you're not familiar with it. It is, there are two sections to the Pali Canon. One is the Vinaya, which are the rules and precepts for the monastics, and the other is the Sutras, which are the discourses mainly of the Buddha, but also there are some from some of his chief disciples. And I have to tell you, when I read these discourses in the Pali Canon, they're so different from what I'm used to reading in Mahayana Buddhism, which seems to flow so beautifully and smoothly. And I have to say, I would think, did the Buddha really talk like this? Did he repeat himself all the time? Did he just talk in these standard phrases? And he didn't. And I'll tell you why they turned out this way. And some of you probably know this. But at the time of the Buddha, and for 300 or 400 years after his parinirvana, nothing was written down. So everything had to be transmitted by oral tradition, by orally telling people, and they had to then memorize it as well. There was a council of 500, I think, arahants, a few months after the Buddha's parinirvana, and at that time, Mahakasho or Mahakassapa, our first ancestor, resided over the council. And he asked Ananda, who had spent the last 25 years of the Buddha's life as his personal attendant and was with him almost all the time, and had an incredible memory, to recite all of the Buddha's teachings, which he did. And then groups of different, what they called companies, at least in what I read, were formed, and each of them, and these were monks, each of them memorized one section or sections of his teaching, so that none of them knew all of them. But each group had the task of memorizing and reciting them and passing them on, generation after generation. So in order to do this, they had to simplify them. So the discourses were edited. They are very repetitive because that was an easy way of remembering them. And they really didn't encompass the depths and scope of the Buddha's teaching and how he talked. But they did encompass his basic teachings, which was very important to preserve. And what Bhikkhu Bodhi said, where did he say this? Oh, here we go. It is unlikely that the teachings that derive from these councils reproduce the Buddha's words verbatim. The Buddha must have spoken spontaneously and elaborated upon his themes in countless ways in response to the various needs of those who thought sought his guidance. So after about 300 or 400 years, another council of monks met. I think there were some in between, in the 1st century BC, and they were afraid that the teachings would be lost if they weren't written down. So at that point, they all were written down. I'm sure it took quite a while. And I feel pretty certain that the Buddha had many conversations privately with, monastic and lay disciples and maybe groups of senior monks that never did get recorded. So we don't know what other teachings he gave to people. So the Pali Canon is a Theravadan version of the Buddha's teaching, and it's also what we study as well. And they were preserved in Pali, which I believe was a made-up language, a Middle Indo-Aryan language that closely related to the regional dialects that the Buddha himself spoke. And then the Chinese agamas are pretty equivalent to these sutras, these teachings, but they were written in Sanskrit initially. So I think that's where they went to China and probably Japan, and all the words that we use are Sanskrit words, and all the words in the Pali Canon are Pali words. So they're different. And for instance, I've already used some of them. Dhamma is the Pali word, and Dharma is the Sanskrit. And then we have Nibbana instead of Nirvana, Sutra instead of Sutta instead of Sutra, and Shravasti instead of Savati, and all kinds of things like that, which you'll encounter. But they're close enough that I think you'll pick them up. And I've been reading the Pali Canon and also Theravadan monks for so long that Nibbana is starting to sound like how it should sound. And Dhamma. But I'll probably end up going back and forth, because when I'm quoting, I generally use the Pali words, and when I'm talking myself, I'm using the Sanskrit words. So I hope that you don't get confused. I thought I might try to just use the Sanskrit words to not to cause confusion, but I probably will forget and just go back and forth. I will also be quoting from a number of Theravadan bhikkhus, because in the Theravadan tradition they really study the Pali Canon, and we don't necessarily do that. And they have a far better understanding of it than I do. And also, what I have found is that since they study the Pali Canon and they put those teachings more directly into practice, the teaching methods, not the teaching, but the teaching methods more directly into practice, and they actually have a real good interpretation of them. And it's not always exactly what's taught in the Pali Canon, and I find that very helpful. Sometimes it's much closer to what we do here than if you were just to read the Pali Canon. I will also occasionally be quoting from a Mahayana Sutra, because I don't think that the teachings of the Pali Canon are all that the Buddha taught. And Red Pine, who translated and did a commentary on the Diamond Sutra, talks about his own belief that the Wisdom Sutras, which include the Diamond Sutra, were spoken by the Buddha, and that few monks actually grasped the meaning of these new teachings because they were very difficult to understand. The Buddha called them the perfection of wisdom, or the wisdom beyond wisdom. And these teachings were most likely not authenticated at the first council because it was only a few months after the Buddha parinirvana, and there were 500 bhikkhus there, whereas the Buddha had thousands and thousands of disciples. And over the next, I guess several months, I'm not sure how long, when they heard of the Buddha's parinirvana, they all came to Rajagriha, where they were. And they held their own council. And this council included many more people. It included monks, nuns, and lay trainees. And they recited all the teachings that they had heard, which may have been a lot more than were recited at the first council. And Red Pine believes that perhaps, and of course we have no way of knowing, but Red Pine believes that perhaps the perfection of wisdom sutras were recited during that time. So, the topics for the talks this week will be the following, unless I change my mind after getting started, but I've worked on them for 2 weeks, so I probably will at least use them as the basis. The first one is the life and humanity of the Buddha. The second one is the first and second noble truths. The third is the third noble truth. The fourth is the fourth noble truth. The fifth is the 4 foundations of mindfulness as part of the 37 methods of training for realizing an enlightenment. And 6 is how the Buddha taught in various short teachings, instructions, and stories. So I know the 4 noble truths are very basic teachings that you've all heard, but I hope I will elaborate them on such a way that you find it helpful. And so I'm going to borrow a phrase from Reverend Vivian that she talked about several weeks ago at a Dharma talk she gave, because I think it's fitting for this week, is that we are forming a mandala this week, where we all come together and we all train together. We hear the Buddha's teachings. We all encourage each other. It's kind of like a sacred space for this week. And we can all rest in the mandala, trust in it. It will uphold us and allow us to, look within ourselves, maybe at difficult things, maybe not. Perhaps allow us to open the heart more. It's a safe place to be. And at the end of the week, we'll dismantle the mandala. But hopefully we will have all gained a lot during that time, myself included. And I'm hoping that the center of the mandala will be Shakyamuni Buddha. That would be a nice image to think of it in that way. So that's my introductory talk. I hope that you all have a wonderful week, and I plan to enjoy myself. And I'll see you all later. Thank you.